The drill bit screamed through rock, and then, without warning, it fell through nothing. Rena cut the machine, listened to the silence, and looked down into the hole she had just made in the floor of a buried cavern. Her headlamp beam went down maybe 30 feet before it hit something dark and solid, not rock, not ice, something smooth, something made. She dropped a line and climbed down. The cavern was large. Her light moved across the walls, and she saw crystals the color of a bruise, deep blue-black, veined with something faintly silver. They were not natural formations. She had been surveying rock and mineral deposits for 12 years. Natural formations did not grow in straight lines. These did. She moved her light slowly across the far wall, and then she stopped moving entirely. There was something inside the crystal. She walked toward it the way a person walks towards something they are not sure is real, slowly, with their weight held carefully, as if speed might shatter the moment. She got close. She pressed her gloved hand flat against the surface of the crystal, and she looked. It was small. That was the first thing. Whatever she had expected, if she had expected anything at all, she had not expected small. The creature suspended in the crystal was no bigger than a large dog. Its scales were blue-green, the color of deep ocean water, and they caught her headlamp and threw it back in fragments of gold and teal. Its wings were folded tight against its body, thin as paper. Its eyes were closed. Its face was round and soft in the way that young faces are soft. It was not old. It had not been old when it went in. Rena stood in that cavern for a long time without thinking anything in particular. Then her scanner buzzed in her pocket, and she remembered she was a professional. She ran the readings twice because she didn't trust the first set. The crystal was Drackery made. She knew that word the way anyone who had passed basic galactic history knew it, from a single paragraph in a textbook about civilizations that no longer existed. The Drackery had been gone for 3,000 years. The Council had declared them extinct. Museums had their bones and their architecture and 3 partial texts that xenolinguists still argued about. The crystal was 2,900 years old. The creature inside it was in biological stasis, not dead, alive in the way that a held breath is alive. She called her survey company from the surface. The connection crackled through 3 relay stations before her supervisor's voice came through, flat and tired. She told him what she had found. She gave him the readings. He told her to document everything, file a full report with the Galactic Preservation Authority, and do not touch anything. He said the authority would send a retrieval team. She asked how long. He said, given current processing backlogs, probably 8 months. Maybe 10. She said she understood. She ended the call and sat at the top of the shaft with the frozen moon stretching out around her in every direction, gray and silent and completely empty of anything living. 8 months. 10 months. The creature below her had already been alone for 3,000 years. She sat there for a long time. Then she went back down. She spent the first day just studying the crystal, taking measurements, running every scan her equipment could run. She told herself she was being thorough. She was being thorough. She was also trying to find a reason not to do what she was already thinking about doing. She didn't find one. On the second day, she started pulling apart her geological heating rods and figuring out if she could reconfigure them into something that would produce a slow, controlled, even warmth without cracking the crystal too fast. It took her 3 days to build the apparatus. She burned her fingers twice. She cursed in 2 languages. On the 5th day, she started the thaw. She stayed in the cavern. She slept down there on a folded thermal sheet, waking every 2 hours to check the temperature readings. She ate ration bars and drank water from her suit recycler and talked out loud sometimes. Not really to the creature. It couldn't hear her. But because the silence was very large and her voice was the only thing filling it. She said things like, "This is going well, I think, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And once, at 3 in the morning on the 7th day, I'm here. I'm still here." On the 9th day, the crystal gave a sound like a held breath being released. Not a crack, not a break, more like a sigh, and the surface began to soften. Rena had her hands on it before she decided to move them. The blue-green faded as the crystal came apart in slow pieces, and the small creature inside began to be visible in a way that wasn't filtered through dark mineral anymore. Its chest moved, just barely, a tiny rise and fall, so small she thought she imagined it. Then a breath came out of it. a small puff of warm vapor that rose in the cold air of the cavern and disappeared, and Rena started crying. She had not expected to do that. She pressed the back of her wrist hard against her mouth and kept her other hand very gently against the creature's side and felt its ribs move with the next breath and the one after that, and she stood in a cave on an unregistered moon at the edge of known space and cried like she had not cried in years. It was alive. It was alive, and she had found it, and it was not alone anymore. The creature would not eat. Rena had carried it up from the cavern wrapped in every thermal layer she owned, strapped to her chest inside her suit jacket because it kept shivering even through the layers, even in the warmth of her ship. She had set it down on her bunk with the heating panel running at full and sat beside it for 6 hours watching its breathing even out from shallow and fast to something closer to steady. Then she had tried to feed it. She had no idea what it ate. She had no idea what a Dracary infant ate. She gave it water first, carefully, from a dropper meant for lubricating drill joints. It swallowed. That was something. Then she tried a standard protein ration, mashed soft. It turned its head away. She tried mineral broth from her emergency kit. Nothing. She pulled up every academic archive she could access from the ship's database. Most Dracary records were locked behind research institution paywalls. She paid for 3 of them, using her last 2 months of survey savings without thinking about it too hard. The texts were dense and written for specialists, but she dug through them. Dracary hatchlings, in their early months, required a specific combination of silicate compounds, trace metals, and something the text called thermal mineral paste, essentially ground rock of a very particular composition, mixed warm. She looked at her geological sample cases. She had 12 different rock types aboard. She spent 4 hours cross-referencing mineral profiles against the metabolic requirements in the text. 3 of her samples had what she needed. She ground them by hand using a sample prep tool designed for analysis, not cooking. She mixed the result with water and heated it on her equipment tray. It smelled terrible. She offered it anyway. The creature lifted its head. Its nostrils moved. It ate, slowly at first, then with increasing determination, pressing its small face into the bowl with the focused urgency of something that had been very, very hungry for a very long time. Rena sat on the floor of her own bunk room and watched it eat and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. She named it Soren. The name came from a language she had studied briefly at university, an old Earth tongue, mostly dead, where it meant morning star. She wasn't sure why that name. Something about the color of his scales when the light hit them, maybe. Something about finding a light in a dark place. He grew fast once he started eating properly. Faster than she expected. Within 2 weeks, he had doubled in size and his wings had started to fill out, thin membranes stretching between small, strong bones. He watched everything she did with enormous golden eyes that missed nothing. She talked to him constantly. She was aware she was doing it the way she was aware of breathing. It was simply what happened. She narrated her days. She explained how the ship's navigation worked, what the readouts meant, why she was running a particular diagnostic. She talked about minerals and geological formations, and once gave him a full 20-minute explanation of why certain rock types formed at certain pressures, pointing to her sample cases. He listened. She could tell he was actually listening. He tilted his head when she said something new. He looked at the thing she pointed to. She filed a report with her survey company stating she had personal circumstances requiring contract suspension. She did not elaborate. She began moving the ship through the quiet edges of charted space. No stations, no traffic, just the long empty corridors between star systems where no one had any particular reason to look at her. About 4 months in, Soren started making sounds that weren't just responses to temperature or hunger. He made them when she talked. They were low, textured sounds, not words, but shaped. She began to understand what some of them meant the way you understand a person before you share a language, through repetition and context and paying attention. Then, one evening, while she was running navigation calculations at her desk, she heard him make a sound she recognized. She turned around. He was looking at her. His golden eyes were steady and patient. He made the sound again, carefully, deliberately, like he had been practicing it when she wasn't paying attention. Reyna. Her name in his mouth, shaped by a creature that had been frozen for 3,000 years and had now learned the word for her specifically, out of everything she had said. She stood up from her chair and walked out of the room. She stood in the narrow corridor outside and pressed both hands over her face. She was not crying exactly. She was doing something that didn't have a clean name. Her shoulders shook. She stood there for 2 full minutes. Then she went back in and sat down in front of him on the floor and said, "That's right. That's my name." "Good." He made the sound again, satisfied, and climbed into her lap with the absolute confidence of something that had decided where it belonged. She sat very still with a dragon in her lap and her hands resting lightly on his back, and thought about the 8 to 10 months the Galactic Preservation Authority would have taken. She thought about a cold cavern, a creature alone, 3,000 years. She thought, no, this was right. Whatever came next, this part was right. Outside the ship, the stars moved slowly past the viewport. Soren tucked his head under her chin and made a sound she was beginning to understand meant he was content, and Rena Aldrich, who had not felt at home anywhere in a very long time, thought that perhaps this was close enough. Harrow Post was not the kind of station where people asked too many questions. That was exactly why Rena had chosen it. It was a mid-range resupply point at the junction of 3 minor trade routes, busy enough that one small survey vessel docking would go completely unnoticed, remote enough that council inspectors showed up maybe twice a year and never stayed long. She needed fuel, food stocks, and 3 specific mineral compounds she could no longer synthesize from her remaining samples. She planned to be docked for 6 hours. Soren had other plans. He was, by now, approximately the size of a large river animal, longer than she was tall, with wings that could fully extend and occasionally did at inconvenient moments. He was also deeply, relentlessly curious about everything, and 6 months of empty space had not been kind to that curiosity. When Rena told him to stay in the back cargo hold and not make any noise and absolutely not go near the windows, he agreed with the sincerity of someone who meant it at the time. She was 20 minutes into her resupply run when her comm crackled. A dockworker's voice, confused and getting less calm by the second. Owner of Berth 7. There's something at your window." By the time she got back to the ship, there were 9 people standing at a respectful and deeply uncertain distance from her cargo bay viewport. Soren was on the other side of the glass, watching them with calm golden eyes, his breath fogging the surface in slow rhythmic puffs. He looked at Rena when she came through the dock. He looked at the crowd. He looked back at her with an expression she had learned to read as, "I did not start this." She got him away from the viewport. It did not matter. Within 6 hours, there were 17 separate reports filed with the Galactic Preservation Authority. 2 news syndicate alerts had gone out on automated systems. A Cherati military attaché stationed on Harrow Post had sent an urgent message to his command describing a possible apex predator incursion in Docking Bay 7 and requesting guidance. Harrow Post security detained Rena in a courtesy lounge. It was a nice room. She drank the complimentary water and waited. Soren walked in beside her without being asked. The 2 security officers who tried to separate them stopped when he placed himself between Rena and the door and said, clearly and without heat, "I will go where she goes." He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, large and quiet and absolutely certain. And the officers looked at each other and decided the paperwork for this scenario did not exist yet, and someone else could figure it out. Director Orvin arrived from the nearest Preservation Authority hub in 48 hours. He came with a staff of 11, a legal team, and a species extraction protocol he had prepared on the transit ride over. He was a tall, gray-skinned Vithali, the kind of species that had been building institutions longer than humanity had been building fires. He was not cruel. He was entirely used to being the most organized person in any situation. He sat down across from Rena in the courtesy lounge and opened his brief. Soren looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Before we begin, may I see your credentials? I would like to know who I am speaking with." Orvin's brief closed slowly. He looked at the dragon. He looked at Rena. He looked back at the dragon. He showed his credentials. What followed was 3 hours of conversation that Rena mostly listened to, because Soren was handling it, and he was, by this point, handling it better than she would have. He was precise. He asked good questions. He waited for full answers before responding. When Orvin explained that the authorities' legal mandate required them to take custody of any discovered Dracari biological material for preservation and study, Soren listened to the entire explanation and then said, very politely, "I am not material." The political situation that opened up in the next 48 hours was something Rena had not fully anticipated, though later she would think she should have. The Dracari had not simply been an extinct species. They had been one of the original signatories of the Galactic Accord, the founding document of interstellar civilization, signed 8,000 years ago by 6 species who had decided that the alternative to cooperation was mutual extinction. The Accord's original text had never been formally amended to remove the Dracari signature. It had seemed unnecessary. They were gone. Except one of them wasn't. A living Dracari was, under the original language of the Accord, a voting member of the Galactic Council. This was not a loophole anyone had bothered to close because for 3,000 years it had been theoretical. It was no longer theoretical. Councillor Fane, ancient, bioluminescent, the oldest member of the current council, transmitted a personal message to Orvin within 24 hours of the first reports. The message was 3 words. It said, "Do not mishandle." The council wanted Soren transferred to their custody. They offered Rena a formal commendation, a financial settlement, and what the document called recognition of her role in this historic discovery. Soren read the offer. He set it down. He looked at Rena for a moment, and something moved behind his golden eyes that she didn't have a word for yet. Then he looked at Orvin and said, "Tell them I will speak with the council in person. Tell them also that Rena Aldrich will be present. These are not separate conditions." Orvin wrote it down. He had stopped looking surprised, which Rena thought was probably healthy for him. Outside the viewport, the station moved around them, full of species going about their days, none of them yet knowing that the galaxy had just quietly shifted direction. Nobody had told Rena what to wear to a Galactic Council session. She wore her cleanest survey jacket, dark gray, slightly worn at the left cuff, and her good boots, which were good primarily in the sense that they had no visible damage. She sat in the observer gallery of the council chamber on Vareth Station and looked down at an oval room that had been designed to make every species inside it feel simultaneously significant and appropriately small. It was doing its job. She felt both. Soren sat on the chamber floor below because no chair existed that accommodated him. He was 4 years old in the way that counted. 4 years of growing and eating and learning and asking questions that sometimes stopped Rena mid-sentence because she didn't have a ready answer. In Dracari developmental terms, the archived text suggested this made him something close to a young adult. He looked it. He was large enough now that the chamber felt differently occupied with him in it. Not threatening. He had never been threatening, but present in a way that shifted the weight of the room. The council was 15 species. Some Rena recognized. Most she didn't. Councillor Fane sat at the far end. She knew him by the slow, soft light that moved under his skin, blue-white, like something deep in cold water. Admiral Dressa of the Chirati delegation sat with her arms folded, which Rena had learned was their species-neutral posture, not hostile. She had stopped reading it as hostility 3 days ago when Dressa had held a door for her without comment. The council's lead speaker presented their offer. It was thorough. It was generous, by the measure of these things. Full recognition of Soren's Dracari status. A formal seat at the council table. Significant resources allocated to locating any surviving Dracari genetic archives. The beginning of what the speaker called the most significant species restoration effort in galactic history. All Soren needed to do was accept a period of supervised study and formal integration under council guidance. Standard procedure, the speaker said, for any newly recognized council member of a previously uncontacted or restored species. Soren listened without moving. He let the full presentation finish. He waited a moment after the speaker was done, the way he had learned to wait. She had taught him that. Or maybe he had learned it from watching her deal with difficult clients in the early days. And then he asked his question. "Where is Rena's seat?" The speaker paused. He explained, with the careful patience of someone who had navigated sensitive diplomatic conversations for decades, that Rena was a human. Humanity had observer status with the council, but had not yet achieved full membership. She would be honored, formally, in the record of this session. She would receive the commendation. But a seat in these proceedings was not something the current framework extended to her. It was not personal, the speaker said. It was structural. Soren nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I decline." The room broke. Not loudly. Council chambers were not built for loud breaks, but the kind of break that happens in the quality of the air when everyone in a space stops performing composure at exactly the same moment. Admiral Dressa uncrossed her arms. 3 counselors spoke at once. Orvin, seated at a side table, pressed his hand over his face. Counselor Fane raised one long hand, and the room went quiet. He was old enough that when he asked for quiet, he got it. Soren spoke again before anyone could redirect him. His voice carried the resonance it had started developing in the last year, a quality that was hard to describe, like the lowest string of an instrument being plucked somewhere below hearing. It didn't fill the room so much as settle into it. I want to tell you what Rena Aldrich did, he said. Not what your report says she did. What she actually did. No one stopped him. She found me in a cavern on an unregistered moon. Her drill broke through the ceiling by accident. She was alone. She had no reason to do anything beyond document me and file a report. She called her supervisor. He told her to wait 8 to 10 months for a retrieval team. She ended the call. He paused. She spent 9 days in that cavern reconfiguring geological equipment to warm me safely. She slept on a folded sheet on a frozen floor and checked my temperature every 2 hours. She talked to me, even though I could not hear her, because the silence was too large. When I took my first breath, she cried. The chamber was very still. She fed me mineral paste she ground herself from survey rock samples, because she bought research archives with her own money and stayed up reading texts meant for specialists until she understood what I needed. She gave up her contracts. She hid in empty space for months because she wanted me to be safe before the galaxy knew I existed. She taught me language. She told me the truth when I asked hard questions. She never once treated me as something to be studied or preserved or managed. She treated me as someone. He looked up, and his golden eyes moved across the council in a slow, unhurried sweep. You have built a civilization on the idea that intelligence and history determine worth. Rena has no seat here because her species is young and unproven by your measure. But I am Dracari. Your entire civilization began with my people's signature. And I am telling you, the human woman in your observer gallery did something none of your protocols could have produced. She did it alone, with geological equipment and stubbornness and a specific inability to leave something small and alive alone in the dark. Humanity is not beneath this council. You have simply not been paying attention. The silence that followed was the longest Vareth Station's chamber had recorded in its operating history. Counselor Fane's hand rose again. His voice, when it came, was slow and dry and not entirely without feeling. I move, he said, to open formal discussion on full human council admission. First such motion in 400 years. I suspect it is overdue. No one immediately objected. Rena sat in the observer gallery in her worn survey jacket and did not make a sound. Below her, Soren found her with his eyes, and he held them there, just for a moment, and she gave him the smallest nod she had. It was enough. 3 days after the council session, Vareth Station was still loud with it. Every corridor had clusters of people talking in lowered voices. Every news relay was running something. Opinions, historical analysis, expert commentary on what a human council admission would mean, what a living Dracari meant, what all of it meant stacked together. Diplomats wanted meetings. Researchers wanted access. Historians wanted to ask Soren things that could fill libraries. He gave them time. He was patient in the way that had always impressed her. Not the patience of someone holding feelings back, but the patience of someone who was genuinely present with whoever was in front of him. She had taught him to be polite. She was fairly certain the patience was just his. She found Soren on an observation deck on the 4th night. She had not gone looking for him specifically. She had gone looking for a window and empty space, which was what she always went looking for when things got too loud inside her head. He was already there. He was sitting in the way he sat when he was thinking, very still, wings folded tight, eyes tracking the stars with a slow focus that was not quite seeing them. She sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. This was something only possible between people who were genuinely comfortable with each other. Actual silence, not silence filled with the weight of things unsaid. Just quiet, and stars, and 2 beings who had eaten mineral paste together in the dark of a survey ship and somehow arrived here. Then Soren said, they found something. In the outer rim. His voice was lower than usual. It had a quality she associated with things he was being careful about. She said, "Tell me." "A vault." Drackery made. Counselor Fane sent the initial survey report this afternoon. Biological archives, genetic material, preserved templates, developmental records. Fane believes it may be possible, with sufficient technology and time, to bring others back. More Drackery. Rena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Soren, that is the best news I have heard in a long time." "It would take years," he said. "Many years. I would need to be present for most of them. The vault is remote. The work is complex. It would require sustained attention." "Of course it would," she said. "And you'll do it." He said, "Yes." The stars moved past the viewport at the speed of a station in slow orbit, slow enough to look still if you didn't watch carefully. She watched them. He watched them. She was getting close to the thing he was circling, and she thought she knew what it was, and she was not sure she was ready, but ready had never been particularly relevant to her life. Soren said, "Rena, I am going to be very old." There it was. "I know," she said. "Drackery live." "I know," she said again. "Not unkind. Just certain. I read the archives. Thousands of years, if nothing goes wrong. Your species was building civilizations while mine was still figuring out agriculture. And you are 38, she said. And humans live, if we're lucky, to about 90. Less in my line of work, statistically." She almost smiled at that. "So you will still be young, in the way that counts for you, when I am very old. And I will be gone while you are still in what your archives would call your early years." He was quiet. She could feel the weight of it beside her, not his physical weight, which was considerable, but the other kind. The kind that comes when someone is holding something large and not sure how to put it down without it breaking. He said, "I do not want to be without you." And she heard it, the whole thing, in 4 words. Not just the fear of loss, the specific, deep wrongness of a creature who had already been alone for 3,000 years, facing the understanding that he would be alone again, that she would be the edge of before and after for him, that every Drackery who came after would know her name from his telling of it, and she would still be gone. She looked at the stars. She said, "You won't be. Not for a long time. We have years, Soren. Real years. Good ones." She paused. "And when that time comes, when it comes, you'll be surrounded by your own people. You'll have built something. You'll carry me with you the way we carry people. In what you remember. In what you learned. In the way you talk to a hatchling who's scared. That's what love does. It doesn't stop at the edges of a life. It just keeps going in a different shape. That's just what it does." He made a sound then that she had never heard from him. It was low, ancient, not quite grief and not quite anything she had a name for. Something from a part of him that was older than language, that the 3,000 years of cold had kept intact along with everything else. He lowered his head until his brow rested gently against her shoulder. She put her hand on the side of his face, the way she had when he was small enough to hold in her arms, when he was shivering and new and had not yet learned the word for her name. Her hand was smaller than one of his scales now. She put it there anyway. "Don't you dare forget a single thing," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I am Drackery. My memory is perfect and eternal." She felt him breathe. "I will remember everything," he said. Outside, the stars kept moving, slow and steady and very far away. She left her hand where it was, and he kept his head where it was, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. There was nothing else that needed saying. The heartbreak was real. She was not going to tell him it wasn't. But it was not the end of anything. Not tonight. Tonight there were still years ahead of them, and the stars were still out, and somewhere in the outer rim there was a vault full of his people waiting to come home. That was something. That was, she thought, quite a lot. Time moves differently when you stop counting it in days. Rena did not stop surveying entirely. She did it differently. Shorter contracts, chosen work, nothing that took her too far from the outer rim for too long. She was there when the first Drackery vault was opened. She stood at the back of a very large room full of people far more qualified than her and watched Soren walk slowly through chambers that his people had built before her planet had a moon in its written records. She had expected him to be overwhelmed. He was not. He walked through it the way he walked through most difficult things, quietly, carefully, taking it in. He stopped once, in front of a wall covered in Drackery script, and stood there for a long time. She did not ask him what it said. He told her later, back at camp, in a voice that was very steady. It is a list of names. Everyone who was put into the crystals. They knew they were the last. They wrote all the names down so someone would know. He paused. My name is there. She put her hand on his. He let her. The restoration work took years, as he had said it would. She was part of it in the way that she was always part of his life. Not officially, not on any document, just present. She helped where she could. She stayed out of the way where she should. She watched the first new Dracary emerge from the restored biological archives. A small, confused, iridescent creature who blinked in the light of the vault chamber and made a sound very like the sound Soren had made 3,000 years later in a cold cave on an unregistered moon. Soren was there for that. He was steady and warm, and he knew exactly what to do. And Rena stood in the back of the room and thought, I taught him some of that. Not all of it, but some. She was present at the first Dracary Council session in 3 millennia. She sat in the observer gallery, the same position she had sat in years ago, in the same worn survey jacket, because she had never really replaced it. This time, the seat beside her had a small placard. It said her name. Counselor Fane had arranged it. She had not asked him to. She did not point it out to anyone. She just sat in it. At 60, her survey work had slowed. At 65, she stopped taking contracts and started writing. Not a memoir. She was careful about that. She did not write her own story. She wrote his. Things he should know about being small. Things she wanted him to carry. The 9 days in the cavern and what the cold felt like. The first mineral paste and how badly it had smelled. His first word in the 2 minutes she had spent in the corridor outside her own bunk room with her hands over her face. The first time he had flown. Really flown, not the short hops around the ship deck. And how she had stood on an open plateau on a quiet moon and watched him go up and not come back down for 40 minutes. And how she had not been scared because she had known he would come back. He always came back. She wrote it all down. Not for anyone else. For him. She died at 69, on a ship she had always meant to upgrade. Soren was with her. That part was quiet and her own, and it belongs to them. What came after belongs to everyone. At the Galactic Council, Soren stood before a full session, 15 species plus 4 Dracary, which was still a small number, but was not 0, which was the number that had mattered for 3,000 years. He did not give a speech. He said he had one document to present in support of the motion for full human council membership, which had been in formal deliberation for nearly 30 years. He read from Rena's writings. He read about the 9 days. He read about the mineral paste. He read about the corridor and the 2 minutes and the hands over her face. He read about standing on a plateau watching a dragon fly for the first time and not being afraid. He read it in a voice that was very even and very careful, and when he finished he put the document down and said nothing else. The vote was unanimous. Admiral Dressa, older now, retired, present as an observer, was seen, by 3 independent witnesses, to briefly cover her face with both hands in a gesture that was not native to Chirati body language. She had clearly picked it up somewhere. On the Vault world, where the Dracary community now numbered in the dozens and growing, there was a mountain Soren had chosen for no official reason anyone could identify. At its base, cut into the stone with meticulous care, was an inscription in old Dracary script. Most species couldn't read it. Soren had written it himself. In translation, it said, "Here begins the record of Rena Aldrich. She found me. She warmed me. She told me the truth. She taught me to love a world that had forgotten my name. Every Dracary who lives after her lives because she sat in a cold cave for 9 days and could not bear to leave something small and alive alone in the dark. Remember her. She was human. She was exactly that. Centuries passed. The Dracary grew in number. Humanity took its seat at the council table. The galaxy changed in the slow, large ways that galaxies change. New alliances, new species found, new arguments about old problems. Soren was present for most of it. He was very old by almost any measure. Not by his own. He still flew sometimes, early in the mornings, over the Vault world. He still came back. He never forgot a single thing. He had promised, and he was Dracary, and Dracary kept their promises. But more than that, he didn't want to forget. Every memory of her was a thing worth keeping. He held all of them, the way she had once held him, carefully, with both hands, in the dark.